I'm Allison, 34, and the day I woke up from emergency surgery, my life shattered. My beloved grandfather's lake house, my sanctuary since childhood, had been sold by my mother-in-law Elaine while I lay unconscious. "You don't deserve it anyway," she sneered when I confronted her. "You're too sick to enjoy it." What she didn't know was that Grandpa was smarter than all of us combined. The look on her face the next day was worth every moment of pain. Before I continue this roller coaster of betrayal and sweet justice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy seeing karma delivered in perfect timing. Pinecrest Lake wasn't just a vacation spot for me, it was the backdrop of my happiest memories. My grandfather Harold bought the property when I was just 5 years old, and from that moment on, every summer became magical. The sprawling 3-acre property sat on the eastern shore of the lake, with the main house perched on a small hill overlooking the water. The guest house, nestled closer to the shoreline, was where I stayed during those childhood summers. I can still close my eyes and smell the pine trees mixing with the scent of Grandpa's famous blueberry pancakes. Every morning, we'd sit on the wraparound porch, watching the fog lift off the water as the sun painted the sky in watercolor strokes of pink and gold. Grandpa would tell me stories about his own childhood, lessons about nature, and wisdom about life that I carry with me to this day. "This place is special, Allie," he'd say, using my childhood nickname while pointing to the water. "It's not just about the property or the house. It's about finding peace when life gets stormy." Little did I know how prophetic those words would become. 2 years ago, when Grandpa passed away at 87, I was devastated. We'd remained close even after I grew up and moved to the city for my career in graphic design. I'd visit at least once a month, sometimes bringing my husband Michael, though he never quite understood the magic of the place. At Grandpa's funeral, I learned he'd left the lake house to me specifically, rather than dividing it among family members. "She was the only one who truly loved this place for what it is," his lawyer Franklin had explained to the family. Reading from a letter Grandpa had written, "The others see property value, Allison sees the soul of Pinecrest." That's when I first noticed the look in my mother-in-law's eyes. Elaine Wilson had always been controlling, but until that moment, she'd masked it well beneath a veneer of Southern charm and backhanded compliments. Michael was her only child, and in her mind, anything that belonged to me should rightfully belong to him, and by extension, to her. "How thoughtful of Harold," she'd said at the reception, her smile tight. "Though it seems like such a responsibility for someone as busy as you, dear." Michael and I had been married for 5 years by then. We'd met at a charity event where I was designing promotional materials, and he was representing his investment firm. The attraction had been immediate. His easy confidence and genuine interest in my work had won me over. For the first 3 years, our marriage had been everything I'd hoped for. We traveled, built our careers, and talked about starting a family. But things began to change after Michael's father passed away. Elaine became increasingly present in our lives, dropping by unannounced, calling multiple times a day, and inserting herself into our decision-making. Michael, feeling responsible for his mother's well-being, found it difficult to set boundaries. "She's just lonely," he'd say whenever I expressed frustration. "She doesn't mean anything by it." The lake house inheritance became a frequent topic of conversation during family dinners. Elaine would casually mention how family properties should stay in the family, or ask pointed questions about whether I planned to sell it, since you two barely have time to visit anyway. Each comment felt like a small paper cut, minor in isolation, but stinging when accumulated. What neither of them knew was that I'd been visiting the lake house alone on days when I claimed to be working late. Those solitary afternoons became my sanctuary as my health began to deteriorate. The first symptoms were easy to dismiss: unusual fatigue, joint pain, occasional fever. But when I found myself unable to hold a pencil during a client meeting due to the pain in my hands, I finally sought medical help. The diagnosis came 6 months after Grandpa's death, an aggressive form of lupus, an autoimmune disease where my body was essentially attacking itself. The treatment plan was intensive, medication, lifestyle changes, and monitoring. I kept it largely to myself at first, not wanting to worry Michael or give Elaine another reason to view me as weak. But as my condition worsened, hospitalization became inevitable. My kidneys were failing and emergency surgery was scheduled to address complications. That's when Elaine's helpful facade intensified. She insisted on organizing our paperwork in case decisions need to be made quickly, and began suggesting that the stress of maintaining the lake house might be contributing to my illness. Perhaps selling would be for the best. She suggested one evening while helping me pack for the hospital. The market is excellent right now, and you could use the money for your treatment. I noticed how she said you instead of we, as if my medical expenses weren't a shared concern with Michael. Something in her tone sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with my fever. The lake house isn't for sale, I said firmly, meeting her eyes. It never will be. She smiled that tight smile again. Of course, dear. I'm just thinking of your health. The night before my surgery, as I lay in bed trying to calm my racing thoughts, I overheard Michael and Elaine talking in the kitchen. Their voices were hushed, but one phrase cut through clearly in Elaine's distinctive drawl. She's not thinking clearly right now. Sometimes we need to make difficult decisions for those we love. In my gut, I knew they weren't just talking about my medical care. The lupus had progressed faster than my doctors anticipated. What began as joint pain and fatigue evolved into kidney inflammation so severe that I required a procedure called a renal biopsy followed by specialized surgery to address the damage. The surgery carried risks, but without it, my prognosis was grim. As the date approached, I noticed a shift in the dynamic between Michael and Elaine. They spoke in hushed tones that ceased when I entered the room, exchanged meaningful glances over dinner, and seemed to be coordinating something behind my back. 3 weeks before my scheduled surgery, Elaine arrived at our house with a stack of papers and a concerned expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I've been speaking with our family lawyer," she announced, setting the papers on our dining table. "With your condition, Michael should have medical power of attorney. Just to be safe." Michael nodded too quickly. "It makes sense, Allie. If you're unconscious and decisions need to be made." I studied the documents she'd brought, immediately noticing they weren't limited to medical decisions. The power of attorney form was comprehensive, covering financial and property matters as well. When I pointed this out, Elaine waved dismissively. "It's just standard language, dear. No one expects to use any of it." That night, I called my friend Rebecca, who had never warmed to either Michael or Elaine. When I explained the situation, her response was immediate and alarmed. "Don't sign anything that broad," she warned. "Get your own lawyer to draw up a limited medical power of attorney. There's something off about this whole thing." The next day, I visited my own attorney and had proper documents drawn up, medical decisions only, with specific limitations. When I presented these to Michael instead of signing Elaine's papers, the flash of disappointment across his face confirmed my growing suspicions. "This doesn't cover everything," he said, frowning at the more limited document. "It covers what's necessary," I replied. "My medical decisions." Later that week, I returned home early from a doctor's appointment to find Elaine sitting at our kitchen table with a man in a suit. They were looking at photographs of the lake house. When I entered, they jumped apart like guilty teenagers, and the man hurriedly gathered his materials. "This is Douglas Peterson," Elaine said smoothly. "An old friend who works in real estate. He was just giving us advice on property values for insurance purposes." Douglas nodded too enthusiastically. "Lovely place you have. Great potential. I'll send those insurance comparison rates to your email, Mrs. Wilson." After he left, I confronted Elaine. "Why are you discussing my property with a real estate agent?" "Don't be paranoid, Allison," she replied. The stress is making you irrational. Michael and I are just trying to make sure everything is properly valued and protected while you focus on getting well. That night, I overheard another conversation between them. Michael's voice was hesitant. I don't know, Mom. She's really attached to that place. Maybe we should respect that. Respect won't pay for specialized treatments if her condition worsens. Elaine responded. She's not thinking clearly right now. The lake house is just sitting there empty, depreciating. If she truly loved you, she'd want to secure your future. The next day, I called Grandpa's lawyer, Franklin, and explained my concerns. His response was immediate and reassuring. Your grandfather anticipated something like this might happen, he said cryptically. Come to my office tomorrow. There are some things you should know. At Franklin's office, he showed me additional paperwork my grandfather had prepared before his death. Harold was a shrewd man who understood family dynamics all too well, Franklin explained, displaying a complex deed arrangement. What your relatives don't know is that the lake house property was actually subdivided into two separate legal entities. The guest house and dock area is one property, while the main house and surrounding 2 acres is another. Both are in your name, but with different legal protections. He continued, showing me additional documents with my grandfather's signature. Furthermore, he established a trust with specific conditions. Any attempt to sell either property without your explicit written consent, not power of attorney, but your direct signature, triggers a clause that consolidates full ownership rights to you alone and nullifies any claims from other family members, including your husband. Relief washed over me. Grandpa thought of everything. Harold had seen family properties disputed before. Franklin nodded. He wanted to make sure your inheritance remained yours, regardless of circumstances. Before leaving his office, I made 2 decisions. First, I retrieved all the important property documents and placed them in a safe deposit box that only I could access. Second, I asked Franklin to prepare paperwork for a post-nuptial agreement protecting my inherited assets. When I returned home that evening, I found Michael and Elaine huddled together at the dining room table again, papers spread between them. They quickly gathered everything when they saw me. Just going over some hospital paperwork, Michael said, not meeting my eyes. Medical bills are so complicated these days, Elaine added with a tight smile. That night, while Michael was showering, I checked his phone and found text messages between him and Douglas Peterson discussing market value and quick sale options. There was also a message from Elaine, remember, this is for her own good. She'll thank us later. The betrayal cut deep, but I maintained my composure. The surgery was just days away, and I needed to focus on my health first. I called Rebecca again, asking her to be my medical proxy instead of Michael. Of course, she said without hesitation. And I'll keep an eye on things while you're recovering. The day before my surgery, while packing my hospital bag, I discovered a business card that had fallen from Elaine's purse during her last visit. It belonged to Douglas Peterson. With a handwritten note on the back, lakefront properties selling fast can expedite closing within 72 hours for the right price. My hands trembled as I tucked the card into my wallet as evidence. That night, as Michael slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my heart heavy with the certainty that the 2 people who should have been protecting me were plotting behind my back. The lake house wasn't just property to me. It was my connection to Grandpa, my sanctuary, my heritage. And they were planning to take it away while I was at my most vulnerable. The morning of my surgery arrived with a gray drizzle that matched my mood. Michael seemed distracted as he drove me to the hospital, checking his phone at every red light and speaking in clipped, nervous sentences. When we arrived, Elaine was already in the waiting area, her presence unexpected and unwelcome. I thought you were visiting your sister in Florida, I said, unable to keep the suspicion from my voice. And miss being here for my daughter-in-law's surgery? What kind of mother-in-law would that make me? Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Besides, Michael needs support too. The pre-op preparations moved quickly. My vital signs were taken, IVs inserted, and consent forms signed. Throughout it all, Michael remained oddly distant, stepping out twice to take phone calls. As the nurses prepared to wheel me into the operating room, I reached for his hand. "Remember, only the medical decisions we discussed," I said firmly. "Nothing else while I'm under." A flash of guilt crossed his face before he nodded. "Of course. I love you, Allie." Those were the last words I heard before the anesthesia took effect. The surgery was complex and lasted nearly 6 hours. According to my doctors, there were complications that required additional procedures. When I finally regained consciousness in the recovery room, the pain was immediate and overwhelming. Through the haze of medication and discomfort, I became aware of someone sitting beside my bed. Not Michael, as I'd expected, but Elaine. "Where's Michael?" I mumbled, my mouth dry and words slurred. "Taking care of important matters," she replied vaguely. "How are you feeling, dear?" Before I could respond, a nurse came to check my vitals and adjust my medication. As she worked, she chatted cheerfully. "You have such a caring mother-in-law," she said. "She's been telling us all about the big changes happening in your family. A new property sale is exciting even under these circumstances." My heart monitor betrayed my sudden spike in panic, beeping rapidly. The nurse looked concerned. "Try to stay calm," she advised. "Your body needs rest." Elaine's expression remained placid, but there was something triumphant in her eyes. "Don't worry about anything right now," she said. "We've taken care of everything while you focus on healing." The implications of her words and the nurse's comment were clear. But in my weakened state, I couldn't formulate a response. The increased pain medication soon pulled me back under, into a fitful sleep filled with dreams of the lake house slipping away from me. When I woke again, hours later, Michael was finally there, sitting in the chair previously occupied by his mother. He looked tired and wouldn't meet my eyes. "What have you done?" I whispered, my voice stronger now despite the pain. "What's best for everyone," he replied, still looking at the floor. "Mom helped me see that holding onto the lake house was selfish when we could use that money for your treatment and our future." "You sold my grandfather's house? Without my consent?" Each word was a struggle against rising anger and betrayal. "We had to act quickly. Douglas found a cash buyer willing to close immediately. The market might have changed if we waited for you to." He trailed off, finally looking at me with a mixture of guilt and defiance. "To what? Wake up? Have a say in my own inheritance." My voice cracked with emotion. Before he could respond, a hospital volunteer entered with a large flower arrangement. "Special delivery from Mrs. Wilson. Looks like congratulations are in order." The card attached read, "Congratulations on the successful sale. Closing complete. Funds transferred. Douglas Peterson Realty." The volunteer's cheerful smile faltered as she sensed the tension in the room. She placed the flowers on the side table and quickly excused herself. I stared at Michael, tears streaming down my face. "How could you do this to me?" He ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "You don't understand. Your medical bills are astronomical, even with insurance. The specialists you need. The ongoing treatment, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. The lake house was just sitting there, empty most of the time." "It was my decision to make," I said, my voice now eerily calm through my tears. "Not yours. Certainly not your mother's." As if summoned by her mention, Elaine appeared in the doorway, seeing me awake and the flowers delivered. She entered with the confident stride of someone who believed herself victorious. "I see you've heard our good news," she said, settling herself at the foot of my bed. "I know you're upset now, but you'll thank us later. That old house was far too much responsibility for someone in your condition." "You had no right," I said, each word deliberate despite my weakened state. "Right?" She laughed, a cold sound devoid of humor. "Let's talk about rights, shall we? That house should have gone to family who could properly care for it." not to someone who visits occasionally and is now too sick to even maintain it. Her facade of concern had completely dropped, revealing the ugly truth of her resentment. You don't deserve it. Allison. You never did. Harold should have left it to blood family who would honor his legacy, not watch it decay while they're laid up in hospital beds. Michael made a weak attempt to intervene. Mom, that's enough? No, Michael, she needs to hear this, Elaine continued, her voice rising. We did what was necessary. The money is already in our account. The papers are signed. It's done. How did you get my signature? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Michael at least had the decency to look ashamed. Mom thought it would be easier to just handle it, since you gave me power of attorney. For medical decisions only, I interrupted. Not for selling my property. Elaine waved dismissively. Details. What matters is that it's done. The buyers are already planning renovations. They're tearing down that old guest house next week to build something more modern. Each word was another knife in my heart. The guest house where I'd spent summers with Grandpa, where he'd taught me to play chess and identify constellations on the porch, would be demolished. His memory erased by strangers who saw only real estate value. Get out, I whispered. Don't be dramatic, Elaine began. Get out, I shouted, setting off alarms on my monitors as my blood pressure spiked dangerously. Nurses rushed in, quickly assessing the situation and firmly asking both Michael and Elaine to leave. As they administered medication to calm me, I caught Elaine's last words to Michael in the hallway. See? She's hysterical. We absolutely made the right decision. Alone with the medical staff. I closed my eyes and focused on breathing through the pain, both physical and emotional. They had betrayed me in the worst possible way, taking advantage of my vulnerability to steal what mattered most. But beneath my grief, a small voice reminded me of my visit to Franklin and the protections my grandfather had put in place. I just needed to hold on until I could contact him. If what Elaine said was true and the sale had already closed, I needed to act quickly. As the medication took effect again, I drifted off with one thought providing cold comfort. Grandpa was smarter than all of us combined. There was still hope. I woke the next morning to a nurse checking my vitals and a heaviness in my chest that had nothing to do with my physical condition. The betrayal by my husband and mother-in-law had settled into my bones, a cold weight that made even breathing feel like an effort. Michael hadn't returned after being ejected from my room. Not even a text message asking about my condition. His absence confirmed everything I needed to know about his priorities. As the nurse finished her checks, she mentioned that my phone had been ringing. Someone's eager to reach you, she said, handing me the device. 3 calls already this morning. The number wasn't one I recognized. But I answered anyway, my voice still rough from sleep and intubation. Mrs. Wilson? This is Douglas Peterson from Lakeview Realty. The voice was professional but tinged with confusion. I hope I'm not disturbing your recovery, but there seems to be some confusion about the property sale that I hoped you could clarify. My heart rate quickened. What confusion, Mr. Peterson? Well, he hesitated. Your mother-in-law facilitated the sale of the guest house property at Pinecrest Lake, which closed yesterday. But when our clients visited this morning to take measurements, they noticed construction markers on the adjacent property, the main house. When they inquired with a neighbor about accessing that section, they were told it was still owned by you and not part of their purchase. I closed my eyes, relief washing over me like a cool wave. Grandpa's planning had worked. Mr. Peterson, I said carefully, could you tell me exactly what property was sold yesterday? The precise legal description. I heard papers shuffling. According to the deed, it's Lot 42B of the Pinecrest Lake subdivision, consisting of the guest house structure and 0.8 acres of lakefront property, including the dock and boathouse. And who signed the sales documents? I asked, already knowing the answer but needing confirmation. More paper shuffling. Well, that's actually another matter I wanted to discuss. The documents were signed with your name, but Mrs. Elaine Wilson handled all the negotiations and closing details. She presented a power of attorney document. But our title company is questioning its applicability to real estate transactions. They're concerned there might be irregularities. There are indeed irregularities, Mr. Peterson, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. I never authorized the sale of any part of my property, and the power of attorney my husband held was strictly limited to medical decisions during my surgery. What you're describing sounds like fraud. There was a long pause before Douglas responded, his tone now notably more cautious. I see. This is concerning. Our firm prides itself on ethical transactions. If what you're saying is accurate, we may have a serious legal situation on our hands. We certainly do, I agreed. But before we go further, I need to contact my attorney. Could you hold off on any further actions regarding either property until you hear from him? Of course, Douglas replied quickly. Please have your attorney contact me directly. And Mrs. Wilson, I apologize for any distress this has caused during your recovery. After ending the call, I immediately phoned Franklin. Despite the early hour, he answered on the second ring. Allison, are you all right? How was the surgery? The surgery was successful, I said, but Elaine and Michael sold the guest house property while I was unconscious. Franklin's sharp intake of breath was followed by a low chuckle. Did they now? And did they happen to forge your signature using that limited medical power of attorney? Exactly that. I confirmed. Then they've triggered Harold's fraud protection clause, he said, satisfaction evident in his voice. Your grandfather anticipated something like this might happen, not specifically during a surgery, of course, but he was concerned about undue influence or pressure from your husband's family. What exactly does the clause do? I asked. It's quite elegant in its simplicity, Franklin explained. Any unauthorized attempt to sell or transfer either property without your explicit consent automatically triggers a transfer of full ownership rights to you alone. Additionally, it nullifies any claim your husband might have had to either property in a divorce proceeding or inheritance situation. And the guest house sale? Is it valid? That's where it gets interesting, Franklin said. Technically, the sale itself could be challenged as fraudulent since it was executed under false pretenses with a forged signature. However, the fraud protection clause doesn't automatically invalidate the transaction. It just ensures that all proceeds from such a sale go directly to you, not to the person who facilitated it. So the money from the sale should legally be yours, not theirs. And I'm guessing they've already received and possibly spent some of it? Elaine mentioned the funds were already in their account, I confirmed. Perfect, Franklin said, and I could practically hear him smiling. That's conversion of your assets. Possibly grand theft, depending on the amount. Between the forged signature, misrepresentation of the power of attorney, and conversion of funds, they've given us everything we need. What should I do next? I asked, already feeling stronger despite my physical condition. First, I'll contact the title company and the real estate agent to inform them of the situation. Then I'll file emergency injunctions to freeze any accounts where the proceeds might have been deposited. Finally, I'll prepare documentation for the sheriff to deliver formal notice of the fraud protection clause being triggered. How soon can you make decisions about how to proceed? I'm making them right now, I said firmly. Move forward with everything. After ending the call with Franklin, I lay back against my pillows, processing everything. The guest house was gone, that hurt deeply, but the main property was secure. More importantly, Michael and Elaine's betrayal had backfired spectacularly thanks to my grandfather's foresight. I pressed the call button for the nurse. Could you help me with something? I asked when she arrived. I need to speak with my doctor about accelerating my discharge planning. There are some important matters I need to handle personally. The nurse looked concerned. You've just had major surgery. The standard recovery time. I understand, I interrupted gently. But some circumstances have changed, and I need to be present for certain legal proceedings. If I promise to follow all medical advice and have proper care at home, could we at least discuss the possibility? She nodded reluctantly. I'll ask the doctor to come by during rounds this morning. While waiting, I called Rebecca to update her on everything that had happened. Those snakes, she exclaimed after hearing about Michael and Elaine's actions. Want me to go pour sugar in their gas tanks? I laughed for the first time since before the surgery. Tempting, but I have a better plan. Can you come to the hospital? I could use some help preparing for what's next. I'll be there in 30 minutes with breakfast that isn't hospital food, she promised. By the time Rebecca arrived, I had already spoken with my doctor, who reluctantly agreed to consider an early discharge in 2 days if my recovery continued to progress well. Franklin had also called back, confirming that the title company was cooperating fully and that the funds from the sale, just over $400,000, had been frozen pending investigation. They sold it for way below market value, Rebecca said, outraged when I told her the amount. That guest house and lakefront alone should have been worth at least $600,000 in today's market. They were in a hurry, I replied. Needed to close before I woke up and discovered what they'd done. As Rebecca helped me organize a timeline of events and gather evidence from my phone, including screenshots of text messages I'd found on Michael's phone before the surgery, my mind kept returning to one detail, Elaine's smug certainty that she'd won. She has no idea what's coming. Does she? Rebecca asked, reading my expression. None, I confirmed, a small, grim smile forming despite my pain. And I can't wait to see her face when she finds out. 2 days after my conversation with Douglas Peterson, I was discharged from the hospital. Against my doctor's advice, but with a strict care plan in place. Rebecca drove me directly to the lake house. We had coordinated with Franklin to ensure the timing aligned perfectly with his legal maneuvers. The drive took nearly 2 hours, during which I alternated between dosing from pain medication and reviewing the documentation Franklin had prepared. According to his most recent update, the sheriff would be delivering the legal notices at 2 p.m., precisely when we expected to arrive. Are you sure you're up for this? Rebecca asked as we turned onto the familiar pine-lined road leading to the property. We could wait at a hotel until it's over. I need to see it, I said firmly. I need to be there when they realize what they've done. As the house came into view, my breath caught. Even after everything. The sight of the sunlight glinting off the lake behind the weathered blue clapboard of the main house filled me with a sense of homecoming. Several vehicles were parked in the circular driveway, Michael's SUV, Elaine's luxury sedan, a truck bearing the logo of a construction company, and an official sheriff's department vehicle. Perfect timing, Rebecca said, pulling in behind the sheriff's car. Walking was still difficult, so Rebecca helped me from the car. We moved slowly toward the main house, where we could hear raised voices coming from the large deck overlooking the lake. As we rounded the corner, the scene came into full view. Elaine stood at the railing, red-faced and gesticulating wildly at Sheriff Thomas, who maintained a professional calm while holding a thick envelope. Michael sat in one of the Adirondack chairs, his head in his hands. A couple I didn't recognize, presumably the buyers, stood awkwardly to one side with Douglas Peterson. This is preposterous, Elaine was shouting. We completed the sale legally. You can't just invalidate a closed real estate transaction because someone changes their mind. Ma'am, I'm not invalidating anything, Sheriff Thomas replied evenly. I'm simply delivering legal notice of the consequences triggered by the sale, as stipulated in the original deed and trust documents. What consequences? What are you talking about? Elaine demanded, snatching the envelope from his hands and tearing it open. That's when she noticed me standing at the edge of the deck, leaning heavily on Rebecca's arm. You, she hissed, her expression morphing from anger to shock. What are you doing here? You should be in the hospital. I wouldn't miss this for the world, Elaine, I replied. my voice steady despite my physical weakness. Michael's head snapped up at the sound of my voice. Allie? What? How did you know what you did? I finished for him. Douglas Peterson called me the morning after the sale. Seems there was some confusion about exactly what property had been sold. Douglas stepped forward, looking uncomfortable but professional. As I explained to Mrs. Wilson Elaine, that is, the buyers were surprised to discover that their purchase only included the guest house portion of the property, not the main residence. That's ridiculous, Elaine snapped. We sold the entire Pinecrest property. No, I corrected, moving carefully to sit in the chair furthest from Michael. You sold lot 42B, which is only the guest house and 0.8 acres. The main house and remaining property is lot 42A, a separate legal entity. That's a technicality, Michael stammered. The power of attorney was for medical decisions only, Sheriff Thomas interjected, according to our review of the documentation. It explicitly excluded property and financial matters. Franklin, who had been standing quietly near the sliding doors leading into the house, stepped forward with another document in hand. Allow me to explain the situation clearly, he said. I'm Franklin Hodges, attorney for Allison Wilson and previously for Harold Jenkins, her grandfather. Mr. Jenkins anticipated potential disputes over this property and established specific legal protections. He addressed the buyers directly. Your purchase of Lot 42B, the guest house property, is technically valid, though executed through fraud. You have two options: maintain ownership of that portion knowing the circumstances, or rescind the sale for a full refund. The husband, a tall man in his 40s, exchanged glances with his wife before responding. We had no idea about any of this. We were told we were purchasing the entire property from a family selling due to medical expenses. A common misrepresentation, Franklin nodded. As for you, he turned to Michael and Elaine. The actions you took triggered the fraud protection clause in Harold Jenkins' will and trust. Let me read it verbatim. He put on reading glasses and recited from the document. Any attempt to sell, transfer, or encumber either property without the explicit written consent of Allison Jenkins Wilson, as evidenced by her signature on appropriate legal documents, shall trigger immediate enforcement of the following conditions. First, all ownership interest in both properties shall vest exclusively with Allison Jenkins Wilson, terminating any marital property interest or inheritance rights of her spouse. Second, any proceeds from such unauthorized sale shall be the sole property of Allison Jenkins Wilson, and any appropriation of said funds by other parties shall constitute conversion of assets. Elaine's face had gone from red to white as Franklin spoke. That's absurd. No court would uphold such vindictive conditions. 3 courts already have, Mrs. Wilson, Franklin replied calmly. This exact clause has been reviewed and affirmed by the county court, the state appellate court, and most recently by the state Supreme Court when Harold established the trust. It is legally binding and immediately enforceable. Michael finally found his voice. What does this mean exactly? In practical terms? Franklin turned to him. In practical terms, it means several things. First, the property you're currently standing on belongs exclusively to Allison, with your marital interest legally terminated. Second, the $425,000 you received from selling the guest house legally belongs to Allison, not to you. Third, your withdrawal and use of those funds constitutes conversion of assets, possibly rising to the level of grand theft depending on the amount spent. We were paying for her medical care. Elaine protested. My medical expenses are covered by insurance, I said quietly, with a manageable out-of-pocket maximum that I can easily afford from my own savings. You know that, Elaine. You saw the policy documents when you were helping organize our paperwork. Sheriff Thomas cleared his throat. In addition to delivering these legal notices, I'm also here to inform you that the district attorney is reviewing this matter for possible criminal charges of fraud, forgery, and grand theft. In the meantime, the funds from the sale have been frozen by court order. Michael looked devastated, the full impact of their actions finally sinking in. "Ali, we never meant to. Save it," I interrupted. Too tired for his excuses. "You betrayed me at my most vulnerable moment. You conspired with your mother to steal my inheritance while I was unconscious, recovering from surgery." "What exactly did you mean to do?" "We meant to secure our future," Elaine said, her chin lifting defiantly despite her pallor. "This property was wasted on you, always sitting empty. Just a monument to sentimentality while medical bills piled up. It wasn't yours to decide," I replied simply. "And now you've lost everything." The buyers, who had been listening in stunned silence, finally spoke up. The wife stepped forward. "We want no part of the situation. We'd like to rescind our purchase and receive our money back." Franklin nodded. "A wise decision. I'll prepare the paperwork immediately." Douglas Peterson looked profoundly uncomfortable. "On behalf of my agency, I want to express our deepest apologies. Had we known about the forgery and misrepresentation, you should have verified the power of attorney more carefully," Franklin interrupted. "But that's a matter for another day. For now, please coordinate with my office on the sale rescission." As the legal details were being discussed, Elaine suddenly lunged toward me, her face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little..." Sheriff Thomas moved with surprising speed for his size, stepping between us. "Ma'am, I strongly advise against whatever you are about to do or say. Your situation is precarious enough already." Elaine froze, then collected herself with visible effort. "This isn't over," she said, her voice low and venomous. "No one humiliates me like this." "You humiliated yourself, Elaine," I said wearily. "I would have shared this place with family who respected it. Instead, you tried to steal it and lost everything." I turned to Sheriff Thomas. "I'd like them removed from my property now, please." "Of course, Mrs. Wilson." He faced Michael and Elaine. "You have 5 minutes to collect any personal belongings and leave the premises. After that, your presence will constitute trespassing." Michael made one last desperate attempt. "Ali, please, we can work this out. I love you." "You should have thought of that before you forged my signature," I replied, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. "Divorce papers will be delivered to you tomorrow. Don't bother contesting them. Franklin has gathered enough evidence of your actions to ensure the judge will be thoroughly unimpressed by any claims you might make." As Sheriff Thomas escorted them to gather their things, I finally allowed myself to slump in the chair, the adrenaline that had kept me going beginning to fade. Rebecca sat beside me, taking my hand. "You did it. You stood your ground and won." "Grandpa did it," I corrected, tears finally flowing freely. "He knew. Somehow he knew they might try something like this." Franklin approached after ensuring Michael and Elaine were indeed collecting their belongings. "Your grandfather was a wise man who understood human nature. He saw how they looked at this property not as a home, but as an asset." I gazed out at the lake, its surface rippling with the afternoon breeze. "I've lost the guest house. All those memories. The structure, yes," Franklin acknowledged. "But not the land itself. Once the sale is rescinded, you'll still own the entire property. You can rebuild." As we watched Michael and Elaine drive away, followed by the sheriff, Douglas, and the buyers, a strange sense of peace settled over me despite the pain and exhaustion. This place had always been my sanctuary, and now, ironically, their attempt to take it had only cemented my claim to it more thoroughly than before. "What will you do now?" Rebecca asked softly. "First, recover from surgery," I said with a small smile. "Then rebuild both the guest house and my life." Without Michael, the sun was beginning to set over the lake, painting the water in shades of gold and amber, just as it had during all those evenings with Grandpa on the porch. "He would be proud of you," Franklin said, following my gaze. "I know." I replied. And somehow, I think he's still looking out for me. The weeks following the confrontation brought a whirlwind of legal proceedings, physical recovery, and emotional processing. I moved permanently into the lake house, finding that the peaceful setting accelerated my healing more effectively than any medication. Rebecca stayed with me initially, helping with daily tasks until I regained enough strength to manage on my own. My medical team arranged for local follow-up care, and a home health nurse visited 3 times weekly to monitor my recovery. Physically, I was improving steadily. Emotionally, I oscillated between vindication, grief, and occasional moments of doubt about the harshness of the consequences Michael and Elaine faced. Those doubts usually dissipated whenever Franklin updated me on their continuing attempts to evade responsibility. 2 weeks after being removed from the property, Elaine filed a countersuit claiming emotional distress and challenging the validity of my grandfather's trust provisions. It's a desperate move, Franklin assured me over coffee on the deck one morning. The judge assigned to the case has already indicated her skepticism. Elaine's lawyer is competent enough to know they're fighting a losing battle. And Michael? I asked, still finding it difficult to say his name without a pang of betrayal. Franklin's expression softened slightly. He's distancing himself from his mother's more aggressive actions. His lawyer has reached out about a potential settlement regarding the divorce. I sighed, watching an osprey circle over the lake. What's he offering? Full admission of wrongdoing, no claims on any of your assets or property, and a quick, uncontested divorce. In exchange, he's asking that you don't pursue criminal charges for the forgery. I considered this while sipping my tea. The betrayal still cut deep, but the thought of drawn-out criminal proceedings exhausted me. What do you think? Legally, his offer is more than fair. You'd walk away with everything, and he'd avoid potential jail time. Franklin said carefully. The personal aspect is entirely your decision. That afternoon, I called Rebecca to discuss the offer. He committed actual crimes, Allie, she reminded me, her protective instincts flaring. Forgery, fraud, theft. Why should he get off without consequences? The consequences are already significant, I pointed out. He's losing his marriage. His reputation in the community is ruined, and according to Franklin, his investment firm has placed him on leave pending the outcome of all this. Still not enough for betraying someone during surgery, Rebecca muttered. Maybe not, I acknowledged. But pursuing criminal charges means prolonging this chapter of my life. More depositions, testimony, court appearances. I'm not sure my health can take it right now. In the end, I accepted Michael's settlement offer with one additional condition. He would need to provide a written account of exactly what happened, including when the plan was conceived and how they executed it. Not for legal purposes, but for my own closure. His 10-page letter arrived 3 days later by courier. Reading it was painful but illuminating. The plan had indeed been Elaine's originally, conceived shortly after my grandfather's funeral. She had spent months planting seeds of financial fear in Michael's mind, gradually convincing him that my illness would bankrupt them and that the unused lake house was the solution. I know these words mean nothing, he wrote near the end, but I will regret this betrayal for the rest of my life. I allowed my mother's influence and my own financial anxieties to override my love and respect for you. There is no excuse, only shame. I folded the letter and placed it in my grandfather's old desk drawer. Perhaps someday I would find forgiveness, but that day was still distant. Elaine's legal challenges continued to fail spectacularly. The judge not only dismissed her countersuit but ordered her to pay my legal fees. When the district attorney presented her with the option to either face criminal charges or make financial restitution, she finally backed down, agreeing to repay the money she had already spent from the fraudulent sale, nearly $30,000 on a new car and luxury items. Hell hath no fury like a country club membership revoked, Rebecca commented when I told her about Elaine's sudden capitulation. By the time autumn painted the surrounding forest in shades of crimson and gold, the legal matters were largely resolved. The divorce was finalized in record time, with Michael making no claims on any assets. Elaine had been forced to sell her designer handbag collection to make restitution. And I had begun interviewing architects about rebuilding the guest house. During this period, I unexpectedly found allies among my neighbors at the lake. Martha and George Kindler, an elderly couple whose property adjoined mine, had apparently never trusted Elaine. Something off about that woman, Martha told me bluntly during an impromptu visit. Bearing a homemade casserole, always asking nosy questions about property values and whether Harold had considered selling before he passed. She even approached us once, George added, settling into a deck chair. Wanted to know if we'd be interested in a joint venture to purchase this place if it ever came on the market. Said it would be better for the lake community than having a part-time resident. Their support, along with that of other neighbors, created an unexpected sense of community I hadn't fully experienced during my previous visits. I'd always seen the lake house as a private retreat, but now found myself hosting small gatherings on the deck or joining the Kindlers for their weekly card games. As my physical strength returned, I began tackling small renovation projects on the main house, painting the kitchen cabinets, replacing the worn carpet in the guest bedroom with hardwood. Each improvement felt like reclaiming the space, erasing the shadow of betrayal that had briefly fallen over it. One crisp October morning, Douglas Peterson called with an unexpected development. Mrs. Wilson, I've been contacted by a young family interested in the guest house property, or rather, where it stood. They're aware of the situation and specifically asked if you might be willing to sell just that portion again. My immediate instinct was refusal, but something made me pause. Tell me about them. The Bakers. James is a high school science teacher. Sarah runs a small bookshop in town. They have 2 children, 8 and 10. They've been saving for years for a lake property, but can only afford something modest. When they heard about what happened with your guest house, they wondered if there might be an opportunity. They're not developers or flippers. They genuinely want to raise their family with summers at the lake. I thought about my own childhood summers here. The magic of growing up with the lake as a playground and classroom. Have them come by, I decided. I'd like to meet them first. The Baker family visited that weekend. The children, Emma and Ethan, immediately raced to the shoreline while their parents apologized profusely. They've been dreaming of a lake since James took them fishing last year, Sarah explained, watching them with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. Over the course of the afternoon, I found myself warming to the family. They weren't wealthy or connected, just hardworking people who valued the same things about the lake that my grandfather had taught me to appreciate. When Emma proudly identified an osprey circling overhead, the same one I watched daily, something clicked into place. 2 weeks later, with Franklin's guidance, I sold them the guest house lot for a fair but affordable price, with specific provisions. They would build in a style complementary to the main house. Construction would respect the existing trees and natural features, and they would grant me right of first refusal should they ever decide to sell. Are you sure about this? Rebecca asked when I told her about the sale. After everything that happened. That's exactly why I'm sure, I replied. What Michael and Elaine did was try to take something precious for their own gain. This is the opposite, sharing something precious so more people can enjoy it. That's what Grandpa would have done. The day the Bakers broke ground on their new cottage, I stood at the edge of my property watching the children help by digging small holes with plastic shovels. Martha Kindler joined me, passing a thermos of hot chocolate. Harold would approve, she said simply. I think so too, I agreed. From the ashes of betrayal, something new and unexpected was growing, not just a rebuilt structure, but a rebuilt sense of community and purpose. The lake house was no longer just my private sanctuary, but part of a larger tapestry of lives and stories continuing to unfold along these shores. And as for Michael and Elaine, the last I heard, They had moved to Florida, where Elaine's sister had reluctantly taken them in. Sometimes consequences come not just through courts and legal documents, but through the natural dissolution of the life you thought you were building. Looking out over the lake that evening, watching the sunset paint the water in the same colors that had captivated me since childhood, I felt something I hadn't expected to find again so soon after betrayal: peace. Winter descended on Pinecrest Lake with a quiet beauty that matched my contemplative mood. The water turned a deep steel blue before finally freezing over in January, transforming the landscape into a pristine white canvas. For the first time, I experienced the lake house in all 4 seasons, discovering the unique character each brought to this special place. My physical recovery progressed steadily. By December, I was strong enough to take daily walks along the shoreline, bundled against the cold but revitalized by the crisp air. My doctors reported that my lupus was responding well to treatment, with inflammation markers decreasing and kidney function improving beyond their initial projections. "Your case is remarkable," Dr. Matthews told me during a checkup. "Often, stress exacerbates autoimmune conditions, but despite everything you've been through, you're healing faster than we anticipated." "It's the lake," I said simply. "Being here, it heals something deeper than just physical symptoms." The main house underwent its own healing transformation. Room by room, I reimagined spaces that had remained largely unchanged since my grandfather's time. The renovations weren't about erasing his presence, but honoring it while creating something that reflected my own journey. The formal dining room, rarely used, became a light-filled art studio where I returned to the graphic design work I'd neglected during my illness. The dark wooden paneling in the living room was painted a warm cream, allowing the original craftsmanship to shine while brightening the space. Upstairs, I converted the smallest bedroom into a meditation room overlooking the lake. Each change felt like a declaration. This space is mine, rightfully mine, and I am building a future here. Rebecca visited frequently, eventually accepting my offer to move into the main house temporarily while reassessing her own life path. Just until spring, she insisted, when arriving with more suitcases than someone staying temporarily should reasonably have. "I need a break from the city. And you need someone to reach the high shelves while you're still recovering." Her presence filled the house with laughter and practicality in equal measure. On evenings when memories and doubts crept in, she was there with terrible movies, homemade popcorn, and an unfailing ability to put things in perspective. "You know what I realized today?" she said one snowy evening as we sat by the fireplace. "You've never once said I should have known, or how could I have been so stupid about Michael's betrayal." I considered this while watching the flames. Blaming myself would give his actions more power. Besides, trust isn't stupidity, even when it's misplaced. The baker's new cottage rose steadily through the winter, a smaller but charming echo of the original guest house. James often stopped by to update me on their progress, sometimes bringing architectural questions or simply sharing his family's excitement. Their children, Emma and Ethan, occasionally accompanied him, bursting with ideas for fishing spots or asking earnest questions about lake wildlife. "We're still pinching ourselves," Sarah confessed during one visit. "We never thought we'd actually have a place here." Emma's already planning her first overnight when it's finished. Watching their family's joy in creating their own lake memories brought an unexpected healing. What Elaine and Michael had tried to destroy was being reborn in a different form, one that honored the property's purpose as a place of connection and renewal. By early spring, significant changes had taken root in my life beyond the physical renovations. I established the Harold Jenkins Foundation for Environmental Education, using part of my divorce settlement to fund lake conservation efforts and summer science programs for local schools. The foundation's first project, in partnership with James Baker, was a water quality monitoring initiative involving his high school students. "You've turned this whole terrible experience into something that benefits the entire community," Martha Kindler observed during one of our now regular coffee meetings. Not many people would respond that way to betrayal. It wasn't a conscious decision, I admitted. It just felt right. Like something Grandpa would have done. In April, precisely 1 year after my surgery and the betrayal that followed, I received an unexpected letter. The return address was from Florida, but it wasn't from Michael or Elaine. Instead, it was from Michael's father's sister, Aunt Catherine, with whom I'd always had a warm if distant relationship. I feel compelled to write to you after finally learning the full extent of what my sister-in-law and nephew did, she wrote. Please know that not everyone in this family supports or condones their actions. Elaine has always been driven by appearances and material gain. Values my late brother unfortunately failed to counterbalance during their marriage. She continued with an update I hadn't sought but found strangely satisfying. Michael has finally begun separating himself from his mother's influence. He's moved out of her sister's house and taken a position teaching finance at a community college, a significant step down from his previous career, but perhaps a necessary humbling. Elaine is, predictably, furious about this development, considering it another betrayal in her narrative of victimhood. I folded the letter thoughtfully after reading it. There was no desire for reconciliation, but a small measure of peace in knowing that perhaps Michael was finding his own path toward redemption. That same week, Franklin delivered the final paperwork officially closing all legal matters related to the property dispute and divorce. It's truly over now, he said, accepting a glass of lemonade on the newly restored deck. How does it feel? I gazed out at the lake, where the Baker's children were carefully launching a small rowboat under their father's supervision. On the adjacent property, George Kindler was teaching his visiting grandchildren how to fish. The landscape was coming alive again after winter, new growth emerging from soil that had seemed dormant, but had been quietly preparing for renewal all along. It feels like I've been carrying a heavy backpack for miles, and I've finally been able to set it down, I said. Not because the journey is over, but because I've found a better way to travel. Harold would be proud, Franklin said, not for the first time. Not just of how you protected what he left you, but of what you're creating from it. As spring bloomed into summer, the lake house became more than just my personal sanctuary. The newly completed Baker cottage brought the sounds of family life back to that portion of the shoreline. My art studio hosted a small collective of local artists. The foundation's educational programs brought school groups for day trips to learn about lake ecology. Rebecca finally did move back to the city, though she reserved her right to indefinite lake privileges and her own designated guest room. In her place came a rotation of friends, family members, and occasionally, retreat participants for the mindfulness weekends I'd begun hosting in partnership with my physical therapist. One evening in late June, I sat alone on the dock, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks reflected perfectly in the still water. A year had passed since the surgery that had been meant to heal my body, but had unexpectedly led to healing much more than that. The betrayal by Michael and Elaine had been devastating in the moment, a violation of trust that cut to the core of our relationship. But in its aftermath, I had discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed and built connections I might never have formed. The lake house remained mine, as my grandfather had intended. But rather than clinging to it possessively as Elaine would have done, I had found joy in sharing it thoughtfully, selectively, with people who appreciated its true value. In doing so, I had transformed it from a symbol of what I'd almost lost into a testament to what I'd found. The lupus would always be part of my life, requiring management and care. But it no longer defined my future or limited my vision of what was possible. Like the lake itself, sometimes calm, sometimes stormy. Always changing, my path forward had revealed itself as something fluid and full of potential. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, I made my way back to the house, where lights glowed warmly from windows that had once seemed sad and empty during my grandfather's absence. Now they represented something different, not just a legacy preserved, but a life reclaimed and reinvented on my own terms. The greatest lesson, perhaps, was one my grandfather had tried to teach me all along. True ownership isn't about possession or control, but about stewardship and appreciation. Elaine had seen only the material value of the lake house and had lost everything in her attempt to claim it. I had recognized its deeper worth and, in fighting to protect it, had gained far more than just property. Some betrayals leave only wreckage in their wake, but others, when faced with clarity and courage, can become unexpected catalysts for growth and transformation. My inheritance had turned out to be not just the lake house itself, but the resilience to rebuild what matters most when life's storms damage the structures we thought would always stand. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that ultimately led to something positive in your life? Or inherited something precious that others didn't understand the true value of? Share your stories in the comments below. I've found that sharing our journeys helps all of us feel less alone in life's challenges. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that sometimes. What feels like an ending can actually be the beginning of something even more beautiful. Thank you for listening, and remember, the most important property we'll ever own is not measured in acres, but in how well we care for ourselves and those we choose to welcome into our lives.